This week's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show is brought to you by the People's Company. That's right, they are back as a sponsor because so often I hear from farmers throughout Iowa and throughout the Midwest who are listening to the podcast while they are planting, while they are harvesting. They're in their tractors, they're in their combines, which makes the People's Company a perfect partner for the Moonlight Graham Show here. As you guys probably well know, the People's Company is based in West Des Moines, Iowa, but they've really grown to be one of the nation's leading providers in land brokerage, land management, land appraisal, and investment services. These guys, and I know Andrew Zelmer and Matt Adams over there at the People's Company, these guys live and breathe farmland, farm management, and they know that industry better than anybody. So if you're looking to buy a farm, sell a farm, having an auction coming up, call the People's Company. They are the best in the business. Check them out at peoplescompany.com.
This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonlight Graham Show. Once again, I am your host, Tim Flattery, and our Moonlighter for this week is the oldest guy ever to win a Supercross race. His name is Justin Brayton, and that's right, I said Supercross. We have never had any motorsports athletes here on the podcast, and Justin Brayton is our first one. And I'm excited to bring him on the podcast because, like I said, he's the oldest guy ever to win a Supercross race, which is known to be a young man's sport because it is so brutal on the body. As you may have guessed, Justin Brayton is from my hometown of Fort Dodge, Iowa. And one thing you probably did not know about Fort Dodge is it has produced an inordinate amount of professional motorcycle racers over the past 30 years. Fort Dodge through the years has been known as a gypsum town. Of course, you remember a couple years ago, we brought back the Fort Dodge gypsum eaters, and that's because Fort Dodge is a gypsum town. There's all these old gypsum mines in Fort Dodge, most of which are still running, but some of which are no longer running, and they have been turned into BMX tracks and dirt bike tracks and motorcycle tracks. And because of that, Fort Dodge has produced some really great, dirt bike riders and motocross riders throughout the years. With Justin Brayton, he's like 35 years old now, but he's still active. He races for the Honda factory team on the Supercross circuit, and he is the best of them. And just a couple years ago, he won his first ever race. He won at Daytona on the Supercross circuit, becoming the oldest ever guy to win a Supercross race. And so it's great to get him on the podcast because he's probably the most accomplished athlete ever to come out of Fort Dodge. I know that's weird to say. We take credit for Nick Collison, but really, most people say Nick Collison is from Iowa Falls, but Justin Brayton has been at the top of the motocross sport for really the past 10 years, but he's been professional for almost 20 years now. And so it was great to get him on the podcast to talk about his career, to learn more about the motocross sport, and to hear a little bit different perspective on sports outside of kind of the core main sports of baseball, basketball, football. And it was great to talk to Justin about this because I remember when he turned professional. He was still in high school back in 2002, and I remember reading in the paper about him turning pro in the motocross world when he was still in high school. Now, if this would have happened in the basketball world or the baseball world, this would have been big, monumental news, of course. But because it was in the racing world, it wasn't as big of news because it's just not as big of a sport. So it was great to hear about his growth in the sport and his trajectory and how you go up the ranks of the motocross world to now where, like I said before, he is on the Honda factory team, which is like the New York Yankees of motocross, of Supercross. And I think you guys are really going to love this interview. Justin's such a great guy. He's really grounded. And he's still at the top of his game at 35 years old. And if you like what we're doing here on the Moonlight Graham Show, make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify. Subscribe to the Moonlight Graham Show, and you know the drill. Leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow the podcast on social media. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We love hearing from you guys each and every week. So enjoy this week's episode with Moonlighter Justin Brayton. But before we get to our interview, I know it's a tough time right now and a lot of people are out of work. So I wanted to talk about a new sponsor we have on the show, buildiowa.org, because the construction industry, especially throughout the Midwest, is still up and running and hiring. And so I was just on this website, buildiowa.org, and what really stood out to me was how much the professional men and women in this industry make. Did you know that professional estimators on average make between $62,000 and $80,000 a year? How about crane operators? What a cool job that is. They make between $60,000 and $70,000 a year on average. The other great part about buildiowa.org is how they spell out exactly how you can get started in the 27 different careers they have listed on the website. They have active resources to companies that are training and hiring. That's right, hiring right now. We know some of you Moonlighters are looking for a career change, or perhaps you've been impacted by this pandemic. If that's you, head on over to buildiowa.org and check out the incredible careers available right now in the construction industry. There's also a link to a job board that lists active jobs that are open right now. The good people at Build Iowa are here to help, and they want to make you aware that there are rewarding career options available for you. And for those of you on social media, check them out. You can find them Build Iowa on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. That's right, buildiowa.org. Because Fort Dodge has a special place in my heart. And it's one of those things where it's like, man, I got to get Justin Brayton on because you may be one of the most successful Fort Dodge athlete ever.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. It's definitely a different type of sport, right? Like, it's obviously not stick and ball, which is what most people know, but there's a lot of successful people from Fort Dodge. It's pretty crazy, actually, how sports in that little town. I mean, some solid athletes for sure. You being one of them.
Right. So when did you first jump on a dirt bike, Justin?
Yeah. So I started riding when I was 3 years old. I got a motorcycle for Christmas, and right away I absolutely loved it. And even before that, I was riding a pedal bike when I was 2, making my own jumps by the time I was 3, and watching dirt bikes on TV all the time. And so yeah, I kind of was exposed to it at a really young age, and then as soon as I got a motorcycle, it was game on. And so I got my first bike when I was 3, and actually started racing when I was 4.
Well, I mean, this had to be something in your family then, because most kids are not watching dirt bike racing on TV when they're 2 or 3 years old.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So my dad was big time into it. He flew to California every year. Him and my mom would go out there and watch the first Supercross of the year, which is in Anaheim in January. And so they would always leave, and I'd be super upset because I wasn't going to watch. So they'd have to VCR it. I'm kind of outdating myself right now, but we'd have to tape it on the VCR, and I would watch it back. But yeah, he was always into it. Not super competitive in it, but he just really enjoyed it, and always had a motorcycle when I was growing up. So yeah, I was exposed to it from the time I was born.
Now, is that something like in your garage growing up? Was your dad always tinkering around with bikes? Was he a mechanic? Could he do stuff like that with his hands? Because I figure this is a sport where you can't really rely completely on somebody else to always be fixing up your bike. Otherwise, it would just get way too expensive. You probably have to learn some of that on your own, right?
Yeah, 100%. And he actually worked at a body shop all growing up, so yeah, even the owner of the body shop and all of his friends that he worked with, they all rode. So I would go to work with him some days, and at the body shop, they would have their motorcycles and just be working on them. And I'd always see them ride. We'd go out to the local fairgrounds and watch races, and I just loved it. I loved anything with 2 wheels. I loved riding my bicycle. So we had some jumps in town that we would just go jump, and yeah, it was just in my blood from the very beginning. And as I sit here today, 35 years old, still doing it, still love it, still super passionate about it. And yeah, I wouldn't change it for the world.
What is it about Fort Dodge and racing? Because you see it with – there was a guy in my grade growing up named Teddy Mayer, and he was like the first kid that I ever saw that – that rode these dirt bikes or motocross, supercross, arena cross, any of this stuff. And I remember in like 4th grade, Teddy Mayer was like nationally ranked and going to, you know, like national events. But there's been tons of guys since then, yourself and Gavin Faith and a host of other guys. Why Fort Dodge? Why are so many of these great racers coming out of the Fort Dodge area?
It's a great question, and a question that honestly a lot of people ask me, no matter where I'm at. I could be in California, I could be in Florida, Texas. People know Fort Dodge, Iowa because of the names you mentioned. And before our time was Chad Pedersen. He's kind of who really got it going, and he's probably 10 or 15 years older than me, but he was the first one that was super successful on a world stage. He won a Supercross in Tampa, Florida in like the early 90s. He moved to California when he was like 15 or 16 to race, and he was ranked number 1 in the nation as an amateur. And so all these things. And so I looked up to him. I wanted to be Chad Pedersen, and coming from a small town that we do in Fort Dodge, for him to make it as far as he did just seemed so awesome, but so unrealistic. He was at the pinnacle of the sport. And so yeah, I always had him to look up to. And then I rode with Teddy a bunch growing up. So we pushed each other. I'm a couple years older than him, but we would push each other. And then Gavin Faith came along, and now there's a whole host of younger kids that are coming up. And I just think a lot of people are into it in Fort Dodge. One, because of the gypsum mine. So we used to just go make tracks all over the town. We would ride our bikes in the woods and find a track. And then there's another guy named Tracy Bachman who owns a sand pit just outside of Fort Dodge that he lets guys go out there and ride. And we just had a crew of us that rode, and all of us really became pretty good. And even the names I didn't mention, there's so many of them that on a local level are really, really good. So yeah, it's pretty cool to hear people talk about it all over the country. Of just the common question I get is, what's in the water up there in Fort Dodge? What are you guys drinking? Because they're all so talented from there.
That's right. And I remember when back in like 2002, which might have been like your senior year of high school, I remember there was an article in the paper about you turning professional. And I was like 16 years old. You're a couple years older than me. But I remember thinking, like, how does a guy turn professional in, motocross racing? Like, I totally didn't understand. It was just a foreign world to me because I was more of the stick and ball athlete. And you were more of this, anything with two wheels type of athlete. But you turned pro in 2002. What does that mean exactly?
So to relate it to stick and ball sports, it's basically like your college would be from the time you're maybe 14, 15, 16. You race all these amateur nationals across the country. They have the biggest national of the year is called Loretta Lynn's. Loretta Lynn's a famous country singer.
Oh, yeah.
But she owns a big piece of property in Tennessee that they host the amateur national championships every year. And that race, for me, meant everything. Just to make it there, only 40 guys in the world in each class, each age group, make it there. You have qualifiers all around the country. So we would travel sometimes to Texas or Illinois or Kentucky to even qualify to get to this race. And then once you're there, you're racing 40 of the world's best. And if you do so well there, then you basically get enough points or you're accepted to get your pro license. And then you pretty much have to get some support from a manufacturer, which is Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, Suzuki. So you pretty much get hired by the Yankees or by the Lakers, or
right.
You start talking to teams and they're kind of scouting you just like scouts do, coming to watch a certain player in college baseball or whatever it is. So 2002, I was a senior in high school, and I had just got fourth at Loretta Lynn's in the pro class. It wasn't really pro, but it's like the expert class, I guess, the highest class you can get at Loretta Lynn's. And I had just got fourth. I ran top 5 all week, and it was that time. It was time to go race your first professional race, and it totally changed my life. My first pro race, I had no idea what to expect. I was racing guys that I'd looked up to all my life, that I'd watched on TV. We showed up just as a family pretty much, with me and my stepdad Shad and a couple of local friends from Fort Dodge. I had some support from Storm Lake Honda, which is out of Storm Lake, Iowa. And we showed up and we almost won the race. I was fastest in practice. I won my heat race, which that gets you to the main event, and almost won the main event. And that kind of put my name on the map as far as at the professional stage, and then you just slowly work your way up, and then you get hired by a team and you start making some money. And now here we are today after so many years of doing it and being on some amazing teams. And so, yeah, that's kind of the process of it.
So how does it work? You mentioned winning like a heat race, or you raced well all week before the main event or to get to the main event. So is there qualifying throughout the week, like qualifying races throughout the week, and then all of the money is at the main event, or can you win money in those heat races as well?
Yeah, so it's all one day. So like, for instance, this weekend I'll be racing in Dallas, Texas, and I'll fly in on Friday, and then Saturday morning we'll get to go walk the track. It's in AT&T Stadium where the Cowboys play.
Nice.
So the track crew has been there all week hauling in dirt, building the track basically on top of the football field, and we'll get to walk the track about 10:30 in the morning, and then we'll have qualifying practices start. Around 12:30 we'll have 2 of those, and they're only 10 minutes long, so you got to figure out the track, figure out which jump lanes you're going to do, as far as, am I going to jump 2 jumps? Am I going to jump 3? Am I going to jump all 4? So it's really difficult. The track changes every weekend. And then they'll take, they only accept 100 entries. So you have to be accepted out of 100 people in the world, be accepted. And then through qualifying practice throughout the day, each one of your lap times is counted. And they only take the top 40 lap times from practice qualifying.
Wow.
So 60 people have to go home. They don't even make it. If you went to watch a Supercross, you wouldn't even see them there because they're already heading home.
That's brutal.
And then they'll have 2 heat races. Yeah, it is pretty brutal. And then we'll have 2 heat races of the 40 remaining. So the first heat race will have 20 guys. The second heat race will have 20 guys. The top 9 from each heat go to the main event, and then they'll have a last chance qualifier. The top 4 from that will go to the main event. So there's only 22 guys in the actual main event. And the main event is it's where you make money. It's where you pay points for the championship. That means everything. So if you make the 22-man final, the main event, that's what means everything. That's the whole goal of the team and rider.
So I can only imagine, if so few guys are making money, like prize money every week, that sponsors got to be like the biggest lifeblood of the sport, similar to like a NASCAR, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. The sponsors and manufacturers are what basically, that's how we're funded. That's how we go racing. For instance, to win a Supercross is $12,000 from the promoter, but from the manufacturer, if you win a race, you win a total of, call it $150,000 to $200,000 sometimes. So yeah, if you win a race, it's obviously pretty lucrative, and it's definitely not stick and ball money, but there's 5 or 6 guys making, $3 to $10 million, and then another 5 or 6 guys making, $500,000 to $1 million, and then another 10 guys or so making 6 figures, and it drops off pretty heavily after that, as far as really making a good living.
When you were growing up and your family's driving you around, to the Loretta Lynn's and down to Texas and all over the country so you can race in the best events, what did that look like for your family? Like, was it just you guys in a truck and a trailer pulling your bikes? Or, I got to imagine that's, it's a lot different than going to play a baseball tournament up in like Algona, Iowa or something.
Yeah, it was a crazy childhood. I've got to be honest. It was wild now for me to be older with kids. It's crazy what we did. It's crazy what my parents dedicated to doing it. Cause we didn't really race locally. When I started getting better and better, when we were 13 or 14 years old, my stepdad would, and mom, we would load up and go to Texas to find the best competition. And I didn't like it at the time because I'm like, man, we could just race in Iowa or Minnesota or Nebraska or somewhere close by, and I could win the race and go home with the first place trophy, and it's going to be easy. But no, my stepdad was like, we're going to seek out who the best guys are in the country, and we're going to drive there and race them on their home track. And you're probably going to get beat, but it's going to make you better. And that's what we did. There was some weekends where we would load up right after my parents got off work, and we'd load up in a motorhome with about a 12-foot long trailer with a couple motorcycles in it, and we would drive all through the night to Texas and race that weekend. And then as soon as the race would be over on Sunday, we'd load up and they would drive all through the night back home. And I remember several mornings, Monday morning, getting home, pulling in the driveway at 4 or 5 a.m. And I would have slept the whole drive home. And my mom and stepdad would go to work on Monday after driving home. They would take turns driving through the night, and it was crazy, but man, it was a really neat childhood. I will say it our family was super close. That's all I wanted to do, is race motorcycles at the highest level. And I absolutely loved it. And I think that's why they did that for me, because I would do the same thing for my kids now. If they were so passionate about something and so driven to be a certain something, whatever that is, I would dedicate my whole life to that. And that's what they did. I mean, we spent every bit of money that my parents made, maxed out credit cards, you name it, to go racing, because it's not cheap. We had motorcycles that cost, $5,000 to $7,000. And at one time I had 5 or 6 bikes, and you've got to buy a motorhome, you've got to buy a trailer, and the gas money to get there, the weeks being gone to like races like Loretta Lynn's, or when we went to the Las Vegas Motor Speedway where they had the World Mini. They were missing work, so they're not making any money. So it was definitely tough, but there was challenges, absolutely, but it was so worth it. It just brought us so much closer, and we spent every weekend together, which was really cool.
That is cool. You mentioned earlier you got 4th at the Loretta Lynn's. You had a really good showing at your first pro event, but walk me through, what does it look like the levels of motorcycle racing? Because I know you have like arena cross and supercross, but to like the lay person, I don't really know the difference, right? I know supercross is the best one, but and then you have like the 450s and the 250s. So walk me through, like, how do you work your way up the ladder? Like, in comparison to like minor league baseball or something.
Yeah, so comparing it to baseball, arena cross would be like AAA ball. You're playing for the Iowa Cubs.
Yep.
You're trying to make it. You're trying to get seen. That would be arena cross. Supercross would be major leagues, except for, the major leagues would be the 450 class. So that's the pinnacle. You're playing for the Yankees. You're starting at shortstop for the New York Yankees if you're in the 450 class. The 250 class is kind of similar to, I guess I would compare it similar to AAA ball as well. Just you're in the big show, but you're on the little bike. You're there, but you haven't quite made it to the top. So the 250 is just a smaller motorcycle, less power. Typically it's younger kids. You're anywhere from, you can turn pro at 16, and you can't just jump straight to the 450 class. You kind of have to earn your way through the 250, earn so many points to even be eligible to race the 450 class. So 450 Supercross is the top sport in the world as far as motorcycle racing on 2 wheels. That's Supercross here in America. Yeah.
And you've been doing that for how many years now? How long did it take you to hit the big leagues, the big time, the 450s and the Supercross?
So this is actually my 10th year. 2010 was my first full season in the 450 class.
And it took you, 131 races to win your first 450 Supercross event, which happened down at Daytona a couple years ago. You actually became the oldest ever guy to win a 450 Supercross race. What was that day like for you?
It's just amazing. I get chills just hearing you say that. I mean, if we were rewinding a little bit, we're talking about coming from Fort Dodge, and we're talking about all the travel that my parents did and all the money we spent. And Supercross, to me, I only watched it on TV, so it seemed like the guys were just cartoon characters. Most guys either lived in California or Florida, it's where they could ride year round. And I'm in Iowa, where, we're sitting inside for 4, 5, 6 months out of the year. So to even make it to Supercross was massive to me. I'll never forget the first time stepping into a big stadium and racing Supercross. And then to jump to the 450 class and be at the pinnacle of the sport, and then to actually win a Supercross, it took 131 tries. But to do it on the biggest stage at Daytona, which is the biggest race of the year, to become the oldest to ever win, there were so many records that I broke that night that it was just an amazing day, and something I honestly thought I would never achieve. Of course, we talk about achieving it, but it would be just like you winning the World Series and hitting a grand slam to win it for the Yankees or something like that. Like, that's how big it was for me at that time. And so yeah, just a really special night. Now everything from then on has just been extra credit. It's just been a bonus to me to finally get that win. It was a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. I've been so close so many times. And yeah, to finally get it done was amazing.
Yeah, and motocross is a young man's game, and we saw it with Gavin Faith. We've brought him up a couple of times already. I mean, that guy's already retired, and he's still in his 20s, just because so many guys get injuries, and the body has to go through so much with you guys, going up on these jumps and landing the bikes and going through crashes and all of this stuff. Yet you're 35 years old and still out there doing it. How have you been able to keep your body in shape throughout throughout the last 20 years?
That's a big passion of mine as well, is fitness and staying fit and eating healthy. And, as as an athlete, it all matters, especially at the highest level. And I take pride in really just taking care of myself and eating as well as you can and spending money on recovery. There's so many different ways you can make the body feel good or recover and keep training. And then also, I've been very fortunate injury-wise. I haven't had a massive injury. Hopefully, we do take that risk every time we jump on the bike. But also, it's just my passion. I love it so much. I could have probably been done a few years ago and been totally fine with it. Or after I won Daytona, I could say, all right, this is my last year. But it's just a passion of mine. I still wake up hungry to be better. I love it. I still feel like I can win races and race at the highest level. As we speak now, I'm riding for my dream team. It's a Honda, factory Honda racing. We've been relating it to baseball. It's the New York Yankees of baseball. It's the most prestigious team to ride for. And still got opportunities to do well, and thankful I'm healthy and able to do it, and still got the dedication and mental capacity, I guess, to keep wanting to do it.
Now, one thing I don't understand about motocross racing, and there actually is not a lot I do understand about it, but when you talk about your team, you talk about like your mechanic and your crew chief, and I totally get that aspect of it. But what I don't understand is how teammates work together. And I know on like the factory Honda team that you have now, you have a teammate, and you guys somehow are working together. And I don't understand that at all. So how does that work?
Yeah, so we definitely work together as far as setting up the motorcycle. And to really explain the team, so factory Honda racing in America has two riders. It's myself and a guy named Ken Roxon. He's from Germany. He's arguably the best rider in the world right now. And we're on the same motorcycle, but we can change it however we want. We have our own suspension technicians on the team that will tune it however we want, but we're constantly getting feedback from each other. If I change my forks and go a little bit stiffer, then I might mention, hey, Ken, this is where I think it's better. And we do work together in that way. But at the end of the day, we're a total individual sport. As soon as we race on Saturday night, there's no team tactics. There's no working together. It's, I want to beat him. He wants to beat me. And that's kind of that.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping to hear.
Yeah. There's no teamwork. There's no strategy once the gate drops and we're racing. So, but it is cool to have a good team dynamic. Ken and I are good friends, and we do a lot of training off the motorcycle together. And also we do all of our kind of motos, we call it during the week. We do those together as well. And we've got a team of about 25 to 30 people that are constantly looking after us, whether it's engine technicians, suspension technicians. We have our own personal mechanic, crew chief, team managers. The list goes on. So a lot of people backing us for sure and giving us the best motorcycle possible to go do our job every Saturday night.
In baseball right now, obviously we're seeing like the Astros sign stealing scandal, and we've seen it in football, basketball, baseball. Steroids are a big thing. NASCAR, I know everybody is always trying to push the limits on the car. and I'm not a gearhead, but is that same type of kind of walking the fine line of cheating and gamesmanship happening in motocross as well, where teams are trying to, get the bikes right up to that line of the rule book?
Yeah, for sure. We're constantly testing the limits. For our sport, you can pretty much add any material to the frame or to the motorcycle. You just can't take it away and make it lighter. But we're constantly trying to, we're walking a fine line. It's just like any sport. You try and get every advantage you can. There's a lot of video technology now where you can overlay a different rider on top of you and see where they're gaining on the track. So after every practice session on the weekends, we'll come back to the semi and we'll kind of watch the TV and go over where somebody's faster, where they're not, which isn't illegal, but it's just that technology is growing and growing. I do know in the past there's been teams run like illegal frames that look exactly the same, but they might be a little bit lighter. They might have different welds in different places that make the bike feel a certain way. So for sure, it's in every sport. As far as PEDs and stuff, it's been a common topic in our sport for a long time because we didn't really have any testing. But now, over the past 3 or 4 years, USADA and WADA are now a part of our sport, so we get drug tested quite a bit.
Oh, really?
And we're constantly drug tested. And in 2014, I was on the WADA list where I basically had to fill out, every month of where I was going to be, when I was going to be there, what hotel I was staying at every weekend, what times my flights were, you name it. I had to, I was constantly watched. And they basically pick 2 or 3 athletes a year that are on that list, and they could show up and test me at any time. So I think that's good. I think it took our sport to the next level because now you are being watched, and there probably has been some cheating in the past. But yeah, now it's hard to get away with anything.
How much does your weight as a rider play into how fast you go? Because I know like maybe the greatest rider of all time was Ricky Carmichael, and he was a pretty little guy, but you're a bigger guy than Carmichael was. So does your weight factor in quite a bit?
Not really with the 450. The bike has so much power, but as far as just overall fitness, it's just power to weight ratio. The lighter you are, the higher your VO2 max is. And we're constantly in the red zone as far as max heart rate. So the more fit you are, the more lean you are, the faster your engine's going to run, which is your body, which is your VO2 max in your body. So you definitely want to be lean. I think every racer now at the highest level, if you were to look at them, you'd say, yeah, they look like a cyclist or a really fit athlete. And you just have to be nowadays, that's with every sport, every little detail matters. And, you definitely have to be pretty fit.
Do you ever play like yourself on PS4 or Xbox and like try to do tricks with yourself?
I don't know, but it is cool to hear fans at the races or hear my niece and nephew or family friends say that they were playing me on TV and stuff. Right. I've actually personally never played it. But yeah, it'll be cool one day to have my kids be playing me on a video game. That's pretty neat. That's stuff you think of when you're a kid, like that's not even possible,
Right.
So it is pretty cool to be on some video games.
Yeah. That's the only reason I know who Ricky Carmichael was, is because I would play that game.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, Justin, the way we end every episode of the Moonlight Graham Show is with the 5 big questions. And the first question is, who's your all-time favorite teammate that you've ever had?
My all-time favorite teammate, I would have to say a guy by the name of Buddy Antonez. He was my first year as a professional. He was my teammate, and he was a 5-time champion at the time. And he took me under his wing, and he was at the later stages of his career, and I was at the very beginning. And I just learned so much from him. He taught me so much. He taught me good and bad, what to do, what not to do. And my learning curve was so much shorter because of him. I'll be forever grateful for what he taught me.
What's one memory that you have from your career? And I know you're still active, but what's one memory that you have when you lay down in bed at night and think, that was a great day? I
would think when I think of just one particular day, and there's a few that come into my mind, but for sure that Daytona day would have to rank at the highest. Just to finally win a Supercross here in America. I'd won all over the world. I've won in Australia and Italy and France and, all over the world. I just hadn't sealed the deal on the biggest stage here in America. So to finally do it on that day, and at Daytona, to have that trophy in my house is just something I'll always cherish, and I'll never forget that day as long as I live.
On that day, who was the most surprising person to reach out to you after you won?
I don't really know. As far as surprising, it was cool to get some texts and messages from, athletes all around the world from different sports. That was cool. It's just, I feel like at the highest level, whether it's NBA or NFL or Supercross or whatever, we all have respect for each other. And that was cool to have a lot of athletes in stick and ball sports and stuff like that reach out and say good job, and they're watching. And I've got a lot of friends in NASCAR as well. And, just guys like that was really cool. And then also some family friends that I grew up with in Fort Dodge that, we'd lose touch with or hadn't spoke to for a long time, and they reached back out. They were watching that night. And, so it was pretty special. It took a long time to go through all the texts, but I read each and every one of them and tried to respond to as many as I could. It was really cool to look back on for sure.
Is there anything that nags at you from your career?
Kind of only winning one race, I think, nags at me a little bit, but then also in the very next breath, I could say, I can't believe I've even won one, so I do think, and I even said it this year at the first race of the year, I came out and won the first heat race. And I said on TV that I still don't think I've reached my full potential, even at 35. And I truly believe that. So I hope when this storybook is closed on this Supercross career, I hope we're not talking about just one race win. But if we are, I'm so lucky and thankful that I've even got one. But also in the next breath, as an athlete, you always want more.
Right.
You always think you could have done more. But so it's kind of two sides to that. But hopefully more than one race win.
What are you most proud of?
I think most proud of the way I've done it, the way I came from Fort Dodge, the way I've reached the highest level of my sport with just purely through hard work and dedication. And then now being a family man and still doing it and still being able to teach my kids that if you're passionate about something and you truly love something so much, you can do anything you want with that. And I'm really proud to say that I've done it that way, and it wasn't just by talent and not working hard. It was straight up dedication from the time I was 3 years old till now I'm 35.
What's the best advice you've ever received, Justin?
Best advice, man. I've received a lot of good advice over the years. I would say just to, if you're passionate about something, that anything is possible. And I know it's so cliche to say that, but I feel like I'm living proof of that truly anything is possible. Even if you are from a small town in Iowa that you can't ride your motorcycle for 6 months out of the year because it's snowing, you can still achieve something big. And I had a lot of people that doubted, but also had a lot of people that believed. And I tried to just listen to the people that believed in me and gave me that type of advice with anything is possible.
I love that. Well, Justin, I really appreciate you joining the Moonlight Graham Show. You are our first motocross rider. You're our first Supercross rider, and it had to be Justin Brayton from Fort Dodge. So thanks for joining us.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for having me, and I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Hey, you bet, man. Hey guys, thanks once again to listening to today's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show. And even though I do most of the interviews here on the podcast, there is a ton of work that happens behind the scenes that you guys don't see that make each episode possible. So I got to give a shout out to the Moonlight Graham Show team. First of all, Brian Sandvig, our producer. Brian does all of the post-production work, and in real life, he's not just a podcast producer, he's also a real estate agent. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home, down in the Kansas or Missouri areas, give Brian Sandvig a call. Next guy on that list is Brendan Gargano. Brendan does all of our design and artwork here on the podcast. He's one of the most talented artists I've ever met, and I love all of his work. If you need any help on the design side with logos or anything like that, give Brendan Gargano a call. The next guy on that list is Andy Flattery, my older brother. Andy, of course, has done some of the interviews here on the podcast. He also is a certified financial planner. He owns a business called Simple Wealth Planning. If you need any help in that area, check Andy Flattery out. And then, of course, the trusty co-host Tom Griffin and my younger brother Neil Flattery. Those guys are just busy being husbands, being fathers, they're family men, but also they do a ton of work here on the show. So thanks again for listening. We really appreciate you guys subscribing and supporting the Moonlight Graham Show.